Welcome to Avoidant Decoded, a space where we break down emotions, relationships, and the truths most people overlook. If you want to understand connection on a deeper level and grow emotionally, make sure you join our membership and become part of this journey. Have you ever felt someone pull away right when things started to feel real, and instead of clarity, all you felt was confusion? What if that distance wasn't rejection, but a silent struggle happening inside them? What if the moment you thought everything was falling apart was actually the moment something deeper was beginning? Because sometimes the space between two people isn't emptiness, it's where emotions are trying to find their truth. Have you ever noticed how someone who once felt close to you can suddenly seem distant, even when nothing obvious has gone wrong? Just a few days ago, everything felt easy, natural, and connected. Then slowly, almost quietly, something begins to shift. At first, it is subtle. Their replies take a little longer. Their tone feels slightly off. The warmth you once felt so clearly starts fading in small, almost unnoticeable ways. And before you can fully understand what is happening, the connection starts to feel uncertain. You try to stay calm. You tell yourself they might just be busy or dealing with something personal. Maybe they are stressed. Maybe it is temporary. But deep down, something doesn't sit right. Your intuition senses the change before your mind can explain it. Then the overthinking begins. You start questioning yourself. Did I do something wrong? Was I too available? Are they losing interest in me? These thoughts don't come gently. They arrive with anxiety, because when someone you care about changes suddenly, your mind prepares for the worst. It tries to protect you before anything actually happens. That is how we are wired. The moment uncertainty appears, the brain rushes to create explanations. But fear does not look for truth. Fear looks for the worst possible outcome. Silence starts to feel like rejection. Distance feels like loss. And without even realizing it, you begin to change too. You become more careful, more guarded. Not because you want to pull away, but because you are trying not to get hurt. But pause for a second and think about this honestly. What if the distance you are noticing does not mean what you think it means? What if their behavior is not about losing feelings, but about struggling with feelings that are becoming too strong? This is where many people misunderstand emotional behavior. Not everyone responds to closeness by moving forward. Some people react to deep emotions by stepping back. They go quiet. They create space. They withdraw for a while. From the outside, it looks like they are losing interest. It feels like they are drifting away, like you are slowly being removed from their world. But inside them, something completely different could be happening. There can be confusion, pressure, emotional conflict, and fear all at the same time. A quiet battle between what they feel and what they are afraid to feel. This is the moment where things either become clear or fall apart completely. Most people react emotionally instead of thoughtfully. They panic, they chase reassurance, they analyze every small detail or shut down to protect themselves. Some mirror the distance, others pull away first to avoid being hurt, and without realizing it, they turn a temporary emotional shift into a permanent ending. Not because the connection was meaningless, but because it was misunderstood. This is not weakness, it is instinct. When people feel uncertainty, they usually respond in one of two ways. They either fight harder for closeness, or they run from it. But when those reactions come from fear, they often lead to the same result: disconnection. Now imagine being in a situation where you truly do not know what the other person is feeling. Their silence is hard to read. Their distance feels confusing. You cannot tell if they are pulling away or simply overwhelmed. And in that moment, you choose to walk away first, because it feels safer than waiting to be rejected. At first, that decision feels strong. It feels like self-respect, like you are protecting your dignity. But what if that choice was based on a misunderstanding? What if you were not avoiding rejection at all? What if you were walking away from something that was just beginning to become real? This is why awareness matters. Not all distance means the same thing. Sometimes it is intentional, sometimes it comes from confusion, and sometimes it shows up when emotions become so deep that a person does not know how to handle them. If you cannot tell the difference, you will respond the wrong way most of the time. And sometimes that misunderstanding costs you something genuine before it even has the chance to grow. So before assuming the worst, before letting fear control your reactions, try to understand what might actually be happening beneath the surface. because what looks like someone pulling away could actually be someone feeling overwhelmed by how much they are starting to feel. Sometimes people pause, not because they want to leave, but because everything is moving too fast emotionally. And when you misread that pause, it feels like rejection every time. But when you begin to see it differently, everything changes. Your reactions shift. Your mindset becomes calmer. Situations that once triggered panic start to make more sense. And that is where clarity comes in. Clarity helps you stop reacting purely from fear. It allows you to see emotional distance from a deeper perspective instead of assuming the connection is ending. Because underneath this behavior, there is often a pattern most people never recognize. There comes a point in certain connections where something changes internally, not in a way that is obvious from the outside, but deep within a person. Their emotions start becoming stronger than their logic. From your side, it may look like hesitation or inconsistency, but inside them, something more complex is happening. One moment, everything feels easy and natural, then suddenly, discomfort appears. Not because anything went wrong, but because the connection has become emotionally real. This is where the internal conflict begins. Their mind starts processing the relationship more deeply. Thoughts become heavier. Questions start to surface, not necessarily about you, but about what this connection means. How attached am I becoming? How vulnerable am I allowing myself to be? What happens if I lose control emotionally? Instead of leaning into those feelings, they instinctively pull back. Not because they do not care, but because caring begins to feel risky. This is something many people do not understand. For some, closeness does not only bring comfort, it also triggers fear. Not loud, obvious fear, but quiet, psychological fear that shapes behavior without them fully realizing it. The fear of dependence, the fear of losing independence, the fear of being emotionally exposed in ways they are not ready for. So when emotions deepen, they respond with caution instead of excitement. They start overthinking. They question their own feelings. They create distance before things become too intense. And most of the time, this reaction is automatic. That is why confusion grows between both people. You see their distance as a loss of interest. They feel your need for reassurance as pressure. You move closer for clarity. They move away for space. And without realizing it, both of you start moving in opposite directions, even though the connection itself may still be very real. Slowly, without either person fully realizing it, both start moving in opposite directions. And this is what makes it so confusing, because underneath everything, the connection can still hold real meaning. Inside them, this creates a kind of emotional tension that becomes exhausting over time. One part of them truly wants to stay connected. They feel the bond, they recognize the comfort you bring, and they can sense that what's building between you is something genuine and unexpected. But at the same time, another part of them reacts as if something is wrong, not because of you, but because the closeness itself starts to feel overwhelming. For them, emotional attachment means vulnerability, and vulnerability is not something they naturally lean into. It's something they've learned to avoid over time. So what happens next is almost automatic. They begin to slow things down. Their energy shifts. They stop expressing themselves as openly. They create a bit of distance, not to lose you, but to feel like they are back in control of their emotions. From your side, it feels like things are fading. It feels like interest is disappearing. But from their side, they are often just trying to handle feelings that suddenly feel too intense. This is where most people misunderstand the situation completely. It's usually not a conscious decision. They are not sitting there planning to pull away from you. This reaction comes from much deeper emotional patterns that were formed long before you came into their life. These patterns are shaped by past experiences, fears, and the ways they learn to protect themselves emotionally. That's why their behavior can feel confusing or even irrational. Even they may not fully understand why they suddenly feel the need to step back. They just know something inside them feels like it's too much, too fast, and their instinct tells them to create space before those feelings take over. This is also where many people make the biggest mistake. They take the distance personally. They assume it says something about their worth. They start believing they are not enough in some way, not attractive enough, not interesting enough, not emotionally enough. They replay every interaction, searching for something they might have done wrong, even when nothing actually went wrong. And because of that fear, they react. Some try harder, pushing for reassurance and closeness. Others shut down completely to protect themselves. But both reactions can unintentionally create pressure, and pressure is often the very thing that triggered the withdrawal in the first place. So instead of bringing the connection back into balance, it actually widens the emotional gap between both people. But when you start to understand what's really happening underneath, everything begins to look different. You stop immediately labeling the distance as rejection. You begin to see it as emotional self-protection, a way for them to regulate what they are feeling, not necessarily a sign that they want you out of their life. Of course, this doesn't mean that every distant person secretly wants something deeper. It doesn't guarantee that every connection will grow stronger. But it does mean that distance doesn't always mean what people assume it means. Sometimes, emotional withdrawal happens because the feelings have become too strong to ignore, and instead of confidently moving forward, the person experiencing those feelings doesn't yet know how to handle them. So they pause, they hesitate, they take a step back to process everything. And if you don't understand this phase, you will misread it almost every time. Silence will feel like absence. Hesitation will feel like lack of care. Space will feel like an ending. When in reality, this moment is often the beginning of emotions they are still trying to understand. And how you interpret this moment can completely shape what happens next. Because there is something deeper happening beneath all of this. The distance is not random. It usually appears under very specific emotional conditions. And once you start recognizing those patterns, the whole situation begins to make more sense. What makes this especially confusing is that the moments that hurt you the most are often the moments that carry the most emotional weight for them internally. On the surface, it looks cold and distant. It feels unclear and unstable. But underneath that silence, something meaningful is often unfolding. Most people never see this because they only focus on what they can observe. They judge the entire connection based on visible behavior without understanding the internal process behind it. But the truth is simple. People don't feel emotionally conflicted over something that means nothing to them. There is no internal struggle where there is no emotional investment. When someone truly doesn't care, everything stays easy, detached, and neutral. That's why sudden inconsistency is not always a sign that feelings are fading. Sometimes it's a sign that the feelings have grown strong enough to disrupt their emotional comfort zone. This is the part most people miss. They assume distance means disinterest. They assume inconsistency means there are no real feelings. They assume silence means it's over. But emotions don't always show themselves clearly, especially in people who are not comfortable with vulnerability. For some individuals, a deep connection doesn't immediately feel safe. It creates inner conflict. One part of them feels drawn in. They feel the comfort, the familiarity, the sense that something about this connection is different in a meaningful way. But another part resists it. A quiet voice inside starts questioning everything. This is getting too intense. This doesn't feel safe. What if I lose control of my emotions? Because of that resistance, they slow everything down. They try to prevent the connection from reaching a depth they don't feel ready for. From the outside, this creates behavior that feels confusing and unpredictable. One moment they seem fully present and engaged. The next moment they feel distant and hard to read. One moment they show clear interest. The next moment they seem unsure or withdrawn. And for the person on the receiving end, it feels like emotional instability. Like something real is slipping away, even when, underneath it all, the connection may still be very much alive. What you're often seeing isn't a lack of emotion. It's someone trying to handle feelings they don't fully understand or feel comfortable with yet. Real emotional connection asks a lot from a person. It requires openness, trust, and stepping into the unknown. It also means letting go of a certain level of control. For someone who has spent most of their life protecting themselves emotionally, that doesn't feel natural or easy. So instead of moving forward smoothly, they hesitate. They pull back to think. They create space so they can process what they're feeling. They try to make sense of their emotions before allowing themselves to go deeper. And that doesn't automatically mean the connection is weak. In many cases, it means the opposite. It means the connection has become strong enough to trigger something inside them. That reaction is often less about you and more about the internal limits they're quietly dealing with. That's why every moment of distance shouldn't instantly be seen as a sign to walk away. When someone truly feels nothing, There's usually no internal conflict, no confusion, no need to step back and figure things out. Everything feels simple. But when something real is there, emotions don't move in a straight line. They come in waves. Sometimes they move forward, sometimes they pull back, sometimes they pause, and sometimes they retreat for a while before moving closer again. When people only look at surface behavior, emotional distance can seem like disinterest or instability, but often there's something much deeper happening underneath. This is where awareness matters. Once you understand that distance doesn't always mean someone has stopped caring, your reactions begin to shift. You stop jumping to conclusions, you observe more, you respond with understanding instead of fear, and that changes everything. Instead of chasing reassurance or pulling away defensively, you create a calmer, emotional space, a space where pressure doesn't build and confusion starts to settle. In that kind of environment, something powerful can happen. The person who pulled back may slowly start to feel safe enough to come closer again, not because they were pushed or pressured, but because the intensity that overwhelmed them no longer feels threatening. Most people never get to this point because fear takes over too quickly. They react before they understand, and in doing that, they often shut down something that could have evolved differently with a little more patience. When you learn to look beyond what's obvious, you stop treating every step back as a final ending. You stop labeling complex emotional patterns as simple disinterest. Most importantly, you stop walking away from connections that might not actually be over. In the end, everything comes down to how you handle uncertainty. Not when things feel easy, but when fear starts pushing you to react. That's where connections either fall apart or grow stronger. The mind naturally wants certainty. It wants to fix things right away, regain control, and feel secure again. But reacting too fast often creates the exact outcome you're trying to avoid. If you pressure someone before they're ready, they resist. If you react from fear, the distance grows. And if you leave too soon, you might end something that still had potential. So instead of reacting immediately, you slow yourself down. Not in a passive way, but in a deliberate and aware way. You stop trying to control their timing and focus on managing your own response. Because this moment isn't just showing you the strength of the connection, it's showing you your own emotional strength. Can you stay grounded when things feel uncertain? Can you stay calm when your thoughts start racing? Can you respond with clarity instead of insecurity? This is where real emotional strength shows up. When you resist the urge to react impulsively, you create something rare, emotional safety. And that kind of safety can completely change things for someone who struggles with closeness. It shows them that space doesn't mean abandonment. It shows them that uncertainty doesn't come with punishment. It shows them that not every connection brings pressure. That doesn't mean you ignore your own needs or accept endless confusion. It simply means recognizing that emotions take time. When you try to rush that process, things become unbalanced. So instead of chasing, you give things room to breathe. Instead of disappearing, you stay steady without becoming overwhelming. Instead of assuming the worst, you stay open long enough for the truth to reveal itself. This balance isn't easy. It takes patience, self-awareness, and the ability to sit with uncertainty without letting it control you. But this is what separates reactions that break connections from responses that allow them to grow. When someone experiences space without added pressure, something begins to shift inside them. They feel less overwhelmed, less trapped, less afraid of what they're feeling. And over time, that creates room for clarity. Not forced clarity, but real clarity that comes naturally when someone finally understands their emotions. And when that happens, their actions start to reflect it. They move closer because they genuinely want to. They open up because they finally feel safe enough. And that's when everything changes. A connection that makes it through this phase rarely stays the same. It becomes more aware, more stable, and stronger than before. But it's important to remember that not every situation will end this way. Not everyone will reach that level of clarity. That's why your focus shouldn't be on controlling the outcome. It should be on how you handle the process. When you move through uncertainty with awareness, you protect yourself. You stop reacting based on assumptions and start navigating difficult moments with confidence and balance. That's something most people never develop. The ability to stay calm while others panic, to understand while others misread, to respond thoughtfully while others react emotionally. Because sometimes distance isn't the end of something meaningful. Sometimes it's the moment that determines whether something fragile breaks under pressure or grows into something stronger. Sometimes distance isn't rejection. Sometimes it's the emotional weight of something becoming real. And how you respond in those moments can either create more fear or create the safety needed for clarity to grow. Real emotional strength isn't about chasing, forcing, or running away. It's about patience, awareness, and staying grounded when things feel complicated. Because not every step back means it's over. Sometimes it's just part of the process that reveals whether something meaningful has the strength to grow into something lasting. In the end, not every moment of distance is meant to break a connection. Sometimes it's meant to reveal its true depth. The real test isn't in perfect moments, but in how you respond when things feel uncertain and unclear. When you choose patience over panic and understanding over assumption, you create space for something real to grow. And if it's meant to last, it won't be because you forced it, but because you allowed it to become strong in its own time.